So thank you for coming today. Tonight's fireside chat is a story of chance meetings, bold career moves, and a mentorship that not only shapes a career but transforms one. And it all started in the pub, but we'll come back to that. So just firstly, let me introduce Rhona. We've obviously heard us a little bit already, but after graduating and falling into market metals and commodities, Rhona went on to build a remarkable career before taking a leap to establish the metals analysis desk at StoneX. Now, along the way, she has become globally renowned for her expertise as well as her leadership style, which is encouraging, approachable, with humour, and based on teamwork. And then we have Natalie. With a background in chemistry and early stints in Hong Kong, she found her passion in commodities. Her first job wasn't a perfect fit, but with a chance introduction in the pub to Rhona, much changed. Fast forward, and Natalie is thriving in a high-profile, client-facing career in the metals desks, and she's also building a name for herself internationally. So together, their journey is a brilliant example of what happens when mentorship, friendship, and hard work come together. So please join me in welcoming Rhona and Natalie. So over to you, Rhona.
Well, as I said, it all started with me going in a direction that I had never intended to go to at all. I stayed with Goldfields for 3 years, and by that stage I was 26, I guess, 25. And the only reason I left them, because I was loving the job and the experience and actually being within an industry as opposed to observing it, was because wherever I looked in terms of the management structure, everyone was so young, I couldn't see that I was going to be able to move onwards and upwards. And I certainly couldn't have stepped into my line manager's shoes because she was working at a level whereby she was talking to central banks and senior bankers and people right at the cutting edge of the industry. And I was too young and too naive, and the central bankers would never have opened their doors to me. It just wouldn't have happened. So I couldn't have done her job. So I moved on through into commodity broking, always as an analyst, never as a salesman, although I did try selling once when the markets were all over the place. And I just couldn't do it. So I learned fairly early on that there are some wonderful people in this world who can be both sales and analysis. I can't. I'm an analyst, true and simple. And even now, if I feel as if I've got to close a deal, I tend to clam up. I leave that to people who can do it, and believe me, we've got some pretty clever ones off our desks, haven't we? So basically, that's what's happened. I've come through various different jobs, and I went freelance for a while. I was made redundant back in the early 2000s, and I thought, well, if I don't go freelance now, I never will. And that was a wonderful experience. I worked at home for 9 years, didn't have a holiday, but I didn't mind. And I ended up working alongside the GFMS team, and I won't bore you with all that, but they are now, without a doubt, the world leaders when it comes to boots on the ground, precious metals markets research and analysis. And I was in a joint venture with them. The boys who started it, and it was all a spin-off from when Goldfields was taken over, to be perfectly honest, so that's a common thread all the way through. Paul and Philip wanted to set up. So all the different joint venture spurs were consolidated into one company, and we were bought by Thomson Reuters. So having started in the early 80s as a baby on the Gold Survey, which is the Bible of the industry, 30 years later I found myself running it. And in the pub one day, a mutual friend spoke to me about Natalie, and you must have known each other for a long time by that stage, hadn't you?
My whole life.
Indeed. And she told me that she had this bright young woman living a couple of doors down. And obviously I let Natalie fill you in on what she was doing, but Sonia had the impression that Natalie was looking elsewhere. Could I help? And we met, and I was deeply impressed. I remain deeply impressed to this day. But we weren't hiring, and I wasn't in a management role at that point. 12 months later, we were hiring, and I was in a management role, and a job came up. And I actually spoke to the person who would be the line manager of that role, and they wanted a senior analyst. And I looked at what his team looked like, and I said, if you take on another senior analyst, and basically I was sort of cheating him because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I said, if you take on another senior analyst, you'll have 3 Indians and 3 chiefs and no Indians. I think I know the perfect Indian. And Andy looked at it and he said, well, yeah, I can see what you're talking about. That makes sense. So I went off to, I can't remember, our in-house headhunters, Capital, I can't remember what they called it now, some clever rinky-dink American name. And we went out and she found Natalie through LinkedIn. So we got in touch with her. And it's just been wonderful ever since. And I can't think of someone that I would ever want to employ more, to the extent that when I was made redundant by Thomson Reuters, thank you, the StoneX job came up because our then head of metals wanted to build a metals analysis team. We didn't have one in the company. We've got a very powerful trading desks, but no analysis. And this is 6 years ago. So the way it worked was that one of my then colleagues and one of my prior colleagues, within the space of 48 hours of each other, contacted me and both said that, prior name, but now StoneX, were looking for an analyst to start a metals team. So I rang Barry Canham and he picked up the phone and said, you're not going to believe this, I'm in the middle of writing you an email. So I went to see him and I said, would you like me to build a business model, which I did. Went back in 3 weeks later, met Philip Smith and Brett Philpott, and got the go-ahead for the next stage. And then this all had to go up to Sean O'Connor and back down again. And it took a couple of months and I got the green light. So I took up the role, had a non-poach from Thomson Reuters. So obviously I couldn't talk to Natalie for quite a few months. But I did talk to her, obviously. I spoke to legal and said, how soon can I do it? And they said, well, so long as she arrives on 6 months plus 1 day, you're fine. So that was all right. But we did it by the book and we did a full round of interviews. Obviously, I recused myself from talking to Natalie because we're friends. And I approached her in the first place. But I can promise you, nobody was of the caliber of this lady. But nobody. So on she came, we had a huge cuddling reception on day 1, and it's gone from there.
What's your side of the story, Natalie?
So going right back to the beginning then. So my academic background is that I did a master's degree in chemistry. And by doing that, you kind of focus on core chemistry, and there are, not going to be too technical, but there's 3 lanes. You study physical, inorganic, and organic. And I always loved inorganic chemistry, which meant that you used metal elements in the work that you did. So doing a master's, I did a dissertation, and to put dates on it, to age myself, this was around, 2010 to 2012. So this was the time that rare earths were really, for those who are interested, particularly in the metal space, in the headlines. And rare earths are basically elements which are used in any electronic item that you own. So we have quite a lot in this room right now. So knowing that's what my dissertation was going to be, I realized with the summers that we have, we had 2-3 months back in the day. I can't remember those. I wish we still did. But I wanted to do some internships during that period. And given that these metals are mined 95% in China, in Inner Mongolia, I knew when I was looking for internships or any exposure to the kind of metals industry, it was probably going to be in Asia. So I luckily was managed to get 2 internships for the same company, APAC Resources, over those summer months out in Hong Kong. So the first summer I worked on the metals desk. The next summer I worked on the oil and gas desk. And that experience, by the time that I'd graduated, I knew that I liked commodities. I knew it was the area that I was interested in. And so I thought that's probably the focus of what I wanted to do. But by no means did I graduate and knew exactly what role I wanted to go in at all. And unfortunately, or maybe it's a good thing because it trains you well, but doing chemistry, it's 9 to 5 and many hours. So unlike a lot of my friends who I lived with at university, I couldn't go down to London and have these interviews to try and get a graduation scheme. So when I graduated, I was really worried I didn't have a job. And I probably do put my hands up and say, I think I went into my first job just desperate to try and get one, get myself on the ladder. And the company I went to work for was a startup for a research house, and it was for oil and gas. And the what's the word I'm looking for? It was 6 months before you're firmly put in that position. Probation, thank you. So I knew I wanted to get to that 6 months and then decide, is this the company or is this what I want to do? So I got to 6 months and I was very sure I'd given it a go. It wasn't the area of focus I wanted. And being a startup, it was a risk. And I couldn't see the ability, particularly from management, to teach me skills, to develop me. And I thought, well, I've given it a good enough time. And so about the 6-month mark, I was like, I'm going to start to look for other opportunities. And I was very concerned. I was like, I started work, I've made the wrong decision. Is it too late to change? And of course, when you've then been working for about 12, 13 years, like I have now, you realize that's nothing and it doesn't matter if you zigzag, you're totally allowed to do that. But that is really where Rhona came in. So I got this phone call as I was walking back from work, which was actually in Farringdon, and it was raining and I was feeling miserable and I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to apply. And I got this phone call from you, having met you previously once before in the pub, to understand what the role of an analyst was. It wasn't the major and it wasn't the first. It definitely won't be the last. But I got this phone call from Rhona, who had then taken this position as the head of GFMS for a metals research house. And she said, there's nothing I can do, but what I can offer you is, do you want to just come and apply and start the interview process? And so that's what I did. And I went through the various interviews. Luckily, I got a position there as a junior metals analyst on the demand side. And this was for precious metals. So gold, silver, platinum, palladium. It's the area that Rhona is the world god of. And that's what took me working for you. So do you want me to go through that bit or? Yeah, keep going. So definitely also, to coin a phrase from Rhona, it's where I kind of cut my teeth on learning how to be an analyst. So making supply and demand models. How do you even start to forecast prices? How do you come up with the view of the market? And it's very different from what I do now, because I started very, very green and a small kind of cog in a big company where we were making analysis from the bottom up. So you'd be in charge of European demand for a sector. So let's say for petroleum demand, or how much platinum or palladium is, put in auto catalysts, and you would go and actually talk to these auto producers. So you're really in the industry making these numbers, and each person would have their particular sector. You'd have a whole mining team that would come up with mining numbers. But it was a wonderful place to really understand how to create these numbers, how the industry works. And what I would say, particularly about Rhona's leadership, is that she always listened. She always guided us. She was very encouraging. And I was there for 6.5 years. And I don't think I would have stayed as long if Rhona hadn't been our leader. And in fact, when she did leave, I left very quickly afterwards as well. But I think the long-lasting impact, an example of how wonderful Rhona was and how close a team we became, is that we still have a WhatsApp group of everybody that worked together, and we try and see each other 2 to 3 times a year. And I think that's really unusual when you move on from a company. And that is because I think the magic that we did create, and it was such a different experience from what I had had, even though briefly in the previous company, where senior management was just miles away. You couldn't go and talk to them. You felt quite insignificant in the company. You didn't feel part of it. And it was just such a different experience that I'll always look back at our time together at GFMS and love it. And indeed, the people that I worked with there.
It's also quite magical because not only are the precious metals a really interesting sector, and obviously the base metals are as well, but because the ethos was that everything was really from bottom up. So there was quite a lot of travel, which for those of you who don't travel, it sounds sexy, but believe me, from time to time, it's a royal pain in the neck. And as Natalie says, you're talking to people in the industry, whether be it supplies, semi-fabs, demand, trading, whatever. So you do actually get right into the bowels of the thing, and you can build a perspective. And that's, as I say, I started in a mining company. I'm not a geologist. I read law. But just to have that hands-on experience from within an industry, I think that that's really important. If you're going to analyze something properly, you need to know how it works and what drives it, and therefore how things might change when external forces shift.
And also a question for you on the sort of the mentorship side of things. Is this something that you intended to do, or is it sort of a natural instinct for you?
I think it's a natural instinct. I don't have any children, but alternatively, I've probably got about 30. And I don't know. It would sound as if I'm showing off, but I do like to give, and I do like to try and help. And there is no point in being didactic about something. People have got to be able to make their own way, but with a little bit of guidance, and maybe, well, have you thought about this, or why not write it that way, or whatever. And then let people go away and think about things themselves. So there is absolutely no point in saying, this is how it's done, go fetch. Yeah, because that's not work at all.
I mean, I would confirm that because so when I switched and came to work for StoneX, not only was I switching metal groups, so instead of doing precious metals, I went to do base metals. But the job was entirely different. So from being on the sidelines, kind of observing and yes, talking to industry players, the role that I now have, it's frontline. You're actively advising in-house to the traders, to the brokers, ideas, what's happening with the market, what you think is going to happen. You're doing it to clients, you're talking to the press. There's a huge amount of responsibility, and it was very, very daunting initially. And even doing things, Fiona, which you've made wonderful, such as now doing StoneX TV, which initially I was like, well, I'm not that trained in it, and I think the environment has massively helped encourage us, and it's now something that I do look forward to doing. You'll be pleased to know. But I would say that Rhona's mentorship has been, there is that guidance there is that person you can talk to, and you certainly do need to be able to do that, but you have also been very hands-off, and I think that's been wonderful in the right way, because it's taught me how to problem solve, to achieve things on my own, to have a go, to really try and be independent. And I think whilst we work very closely together, you do the precious metals, I do base metals, and we now work kind of alongside each other, which I never could have imagined. And by no means am I anywhere near Rhona's level, not at all. But I never thought that I would be able to have these responsibilities or this exposure or feel comfortable in actually doing it. And I love coming to work every day and being in this environment, and there's always challenges. I think StoneX has been in a perfect environment to kind of nurture that. And I really don't think I could have done it if I hadn't come in under you, because it was such a culture shock, environment shock, discipline shock in every way. And there's been challenges along the way, and there always is going to be.
Whereas I had prior experience of dealing with dealers.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of strong personalities that you do have to face, and I think that's something that once you go through it, does actually help to strengthen your career. You might not feel like it at the time. I think one of the biggest lessons is never think that anything is not going to have challenges, because it will. But I think the satisfaction you have from going through it, both personally and for your career, is wonderful. But also being able to talk to a girlfriend, it doesn't have to be, a manager necessarily. It helps if it is, though, because I'm sure that all of us at some point in our career will come up and face something that might be uncomfortable, or that you're not, expecting. And so I think having these kind of events and having peers is very helpful.
Definitely. And as far as questions are concerned, I'm going to open this up to everyone as well. So do have a think if you've got any questions to ask. But I was going to say, have you got any advice for someone who's just starting out in their career, Rhona?
I was asked this question years ago by a friend of a friend whose daughter had just graduated. I can't remember what she was going to do, but he said, "What advice would you give a young woman who's starting out in her career?" Which I thought was a bit sexist, but I let that ride. Um, but my response was, it would be the same as I would say to a young man, which is work hard, keep your head down, be gracious, and above all, maintain your sense of humour.
So true. And what about you, Natalie?
Uh, So I would agree with Rhona. I think that you don't need to separate it for a man and a woman if we're talking about advice. But what I would say is, I think, be confident in the skill set that you have. Don't see someone and try and copycat them. You should enhance the skills that you have, work on that, and how that becomes valuable, I think, for the company. Secondly, as I've said, it's never going to be smooth running, and that's okay. And you have people around you, and it's always going to be growth, and it's something to go through, and it will strengthen your career. And then I think the last thing I would say is, if you get to a point where you feel you're on top of everything, you feel comfortable, it means you're ready for the next challenge, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable. And don't be afraid to ask for it. Potentially that's something that women famously aren't as good as with men, whether it's asking for money or that job opportunity or how to get there. I think, be vocal with what you want. And I think you'll be amazed by putting yourself forward, because no one's going to know if you don't do it. So it has to come from you. And I think that's been something that I definitely learned.
Yeah, do you know, and I'm going to add to that. I think, that feeling where you do have butterflies. I think when you get that feeling, that's when you know you're pushing yourself as a barometer of how often you go through that feeling. But just carrying on with that question, also sort of further through the career, do you have any advice for someone who's halfway through their career rather than just starting, for example?
Oh, you know how to hit a girl where it hurts, don't you? I've got a very good example of that, and it only goes back a couple of weeks. To give you a little bit of background, on the morning of the 22nd of April this year, the gold price hit an intraday high of $3,500.10. And on its way there, over the course of the previous couple of hours, it had gone through 3,486. The significance of which is that way back on the 21st of January 1980, it had hit $850 an ounce as a result of a confluence of four different factors with which I will not bore you, but it was straight up and straight back down again. And if you inflate that using the US CPI, in March and April 2025, 3486 was the current day equivalent of 850 back then. So we went through it, and putting that together with the fact that we'd had 15 months of all sorts of geopolitical risks and various other different financial and political situations, building a phalanx of investors, and I was starting to feel that the gold market was getting a little bit crowded. So I put my head over the parapet, and I was there to be shot at. And on the basis that we were now at a record high in real terms as well as nominal, I called the high. And it was looking good until about 10 days ago. So the answer to your question is that because I didn't think enough about the geopolitical influence of President Trump trying to get shot of Lisa Cook, and thereby potentially increasing his influence over the independence or potential lack thereof of the Federal Reserve Board, and what that could therefore do to geopolitics, the position of the United States, currencies, and general uncertainty all round, I didn't think it through sufficiently, and I should have done. Because had I done so, I would have changed tack and said, this, I think, is probably one of the black swans which has changed the environment, and I didn't do it. So as of yesterday, I'm wrong. I hold my hands up, and I've done it in print, and I did it with Fiona's lovely colleague Jo on Stone TV this morning. I got it wrong, and I think one of the most important things, particularly as an analyst, but I think it applies elsewhere as well, if you have made a mess of something, have the strength of character to go public and say so, and say why, and say what you think can be done to remedy that situation. Because if you don't, your colleagues won't trust you, and your clients certainly won't. And it also means that you're actually thinking about things and you've added to your own perceptions. And that, if anything, quite apart from having the humility to admit that you've got something wrong, should stand you in even better stead than you were before.
Yeah. It turned it into a positive.
It had to.
Excellent. And how has your career development in StoneX compared to previously? Where should we start? We'll start with you.
Mine is short and sweet. I've already alluded to it. I started in the mining sector. I moved into working as an analyst for commodity brokers, then with an investment bank who had a bullion trading side and corporate finance and all the rest of it. So for quite a long time, I was in the beating heart of the markets. Then I became an observer for about 20 years, and I was still talking to lots of people, and it was still interesting. But coming back to StoneX, particularly as the power of the precious metals desk and the LME boys has grown and grown and grown, and to be back right in the thick of it with people who are actually making markets and moving and shaking, quite apart from the fun and the banter of being able to listen to the boys with their right language. But to be able to walk just 15 feet and say to the head of the precious metals trading, why did that happen? Or they might come to me and say, what do you think about such and such? And the same happens to Natalie. And that is such a joy to actually be back in the real life part of the market. And obviously it happens with all the other different areas within the company as well. That's the joy for me. I'm back where I belong.
And for you, Natalie?
I mean, so it's my first experience of having this kind of front office, being in, the hot seat. And as I said, initially it was a steep climb and I had to work very hard, as we all have to do, but it was absolutely worth it. And I love the role that I have now. And I would agree with you at StoneX. It is so unusual that I can, as you said, walk a couple of foot and I can talk to Michael Skinner, our head of metals, and say, I've got an idea about something, or GP, the co-head of LME, and say, well, what about this idea? Or should we host and do this event? The options or the ideas, they want to hear that. So I think the opportunities are really limitless, and the level of responsibility of the people in the company you can approach or talk to, they want to hear from you. They want to talk to you. They welcome it. And I think that's very unusual. And I think that's such a wonderful thing of working in StoneX, and probably why everybody is very happy there. You don't know where things may lead. And, the idea of doing StoneX TV didn't used to be there. Then that, came in. We're thinking about doing podcasts and some the idea of TV. And now we've got studios all over the world, and we're pumping out so much material and it's being watched. One of my friends watched it, and they're not in commodities, and I didn't make them. But it's wonderful. There's so much growth, and also I think cross department there's so much growth as well. That I just think it's very exciting, and I look forward to in a year's time talking about what we didn't know today, because I think it will be different.
Definitely. And what does StoneX mean for you, Rhona?
Well, I want to echo a lot of what Matty has just said. Actually, I've worked for 3 other large North American organisations. This is by far, and various other easy. This is by far the best company I've ever worked for, and I'm not just saying it because I'm it. It really is. Otherwise, I probably would still beat it. It's entrepreneurial. It's nimble, even with 4,000 of us. Management's ears are always open. And one of the things that appeals to me, apart from the fact that there's politics in every company, but there's a lower degree of politics thus far, in my observation, than in other places that I've worked. But one of the keys for me is, as Natalie says, if you have an idea, doesn't matter whether you're an intern of 6 weeks standing or someone in middle management who's been there for 15, say, take it to the relevant level of management. They will always listen. And if they think it's going to work, they will at least try and run with it. Whereas I can think of several large companies where I've worked where the default has been no.
Yeah.
It's refreshing, very.
Yes. I'll echo that as well. I think the opportunities and as you said, you just don't know what's going to come around the corner, and always to jump on them because you don't know what's going to happen when you run with them. So thank you so much for your inspiring discussion today. Has anybody got any questions out there or something they would like to comment on or ask? They don't bite. Yeah.
So you have a room full of women here who are both have both the potential to be mentored as well as to be mentors. So I'm going to direct this one's Natalie, if I could. Could you talk about both goals? How do you take mentorship well? And then having had such a strong mentor, can you give those others, that same group, advice on how to be a good mentor to those who often could use it themselves?
Of course. So talking about being mentored, it is something that I still am constantly, because
No one ever stops learning.
no, you never stop learning. And Rhona has been invaluable in my life and my career. And the respect that I have for her goes outside of just the working relationship. It is also a personal relationship as well. And I think that sometimes you need that support, you need guidance, not only for decisions that you're making, but on the day-to-day basis, you can have a bad day. And I don't want to separate men and women, but it has been wonderful having a woman, because we do experience a different course of life sometimes. And I hope that we never don't work together. I don't want that day to come to an end.
I might die.
Right, I need a drink now. No, I think having a mentor is something that will be invaluable for your life, and I would really tell you to seek it out, or multiple, because the more help you can have, the more advice you can have. Why wouldn't you take it? So I do really strongly encourage you to do that. And then to mentor somebody else. I mean, we have a lot of interns that come in over the summer, which is wonderful at StoneX, and more. That's something that I spend my time with in those summer months, and I've been here the whole of this summer period. And I think one thing I always try to do is remember exactly how I felt when I started working, and be very human with them. Everybody is there because they're trying to learn, or if they have an internship there, it's because they're interested. They want to hear about your life experiences. So whilst you're teaching them lessons about work or how to do projects or anything else. It's also about how to approach work, how checking that they're feeling okay, and this is how the environment is it suitable for them. Ask them questions as well. So I think do it on a human level as well as a professional level is probably my approach to doing that.
Has anyone else in the room had a more formal mentorship experience? Does anyone do? Okay. Can you give some ideas on how you either sought it out and then how you utilize that opportunity? We're at the start paradigm, but it's awkward. Det er sådan med Thompson and Toes Henri Osner on Kate I shop Temandia she respect métier. And I saw that so Gabe is out of our Winter Park office and is a head trader in the Equidistry.
Yeah, she's a pass EBG.
And that about 8 months ago, StoneX offered the mentee program. And I took it and it's been fantastic. She's been so helpful. Just as you said, having guidance from a completely different perspective. Got my manager, he's great, but it's having she's from the US and she's been at StoneX. She was in one of the longest standing hooplets there. Just she knows so well. So it's so great having just a different outlet as you sort to kind of slows.
I mean, one thing that just comes to mind when you say that is, and I remember you saying it to me for the first time, going on stage and presenting in front of very, significant audiences, is that you told me it's okay to be nervous. Everyone's going to have butterflies in their stomach if they're going to go and do public speaking on this scale. And I thought, oh my God, does Rhona ever feel nervous going on stage? And I remind myself of that, and it made it okay. And that was a really wonderful, just a little thing that you said to me that I say to myself every time before I have to go on to a stage now.
Sometimes it is the little things that count. And particularly, I think from the point of view of being a mentor, or I never even think of myself as a mentor, but obviously I am without sort of realising it, is that it's important to be able to notice the little things. If someone's head is down maybe, or their shoulders are hunched over, or they're taking longer to do something than normal, it's all right to sort of put a hand on a shoulder and say, you okay? Fancy a gin? Or whatever. Let's hit the pub. Just little things like that. People will send out signals without necessarily realising that they're doing it. So I think a strong streak of sympathy is important in that role.
Well, I have a comment.
You always do.
It's a good one. I must say, I'm so in awe of your relationship between the two of you, and as a mentor and a mentee, and that's part of the reason why you're sitting here right now, because I think it's incredible what you've done in the last decade, as it were. And I think it's really important. A lot of women sort of are quite shy, not wanting to ask for help or ask for direction, but we have to, right? Nobody knows everything. Everybody needs some guidance at some time in your life. And I think I am so appreciative of your, of your background and of what you're here today and what you've told us. And I like to see that we all, at some point in our life, will reach out and go, hey, can I have a coffee with you for 10 minutes? I just want to bounce an idea off you. It doesn't have to be a formal route all the time. It can be informal as well. And I think we should use this platform as something easy to see, sisterhood works, right? Don't fail. So thank you, I want to say, for that. It's really inspiring, and I hope everybody takes away something tonight. Yeah, most of us. Thank you.